What's up, TKO Nation? Welcome back to the TKO podcast. Make sure you tune in.
Alrighty, folks, welcome back. Welcome to Technical Knockout, the MMA podcast. Today we've got a very special episode for you here. We are doing a career retrospective on none other than Australia's first UFC champion, Robert the Reaper Whittaker. Thank you very much for joining us. Robert Whittaker is one of my favorite fighters of all time, and I'm sure he's a lot of your favorite fighters of all time, hence why you clicked on this video. In general, he was he still is a huge fan favorite from the last 10 or so years of the UFC, and the guy's had a really awesome, storied career, and we're going to break it down in detail today. So thanks for joining us. I'm going to try to keep this as short and sweet as I can. I want to grasp your attention, but I also want to cover all of our bases as far as Whittaker's career goes, and let's start off without further ado. So, Robert Whittaker got his start in the UFC on The Ultimate Fighter, as many great champions did. He was on a side piece of The Ultimate Fighter, a spin-off of The Ultimate Fighter called Tough Smashes, and this was Australia versus the UK. So they had Ross Pearson representing the UK and George Soteropoulos representing Australia, a couple of grizzled lightweight vets at that time, and Whittaker went on to win the show. He's one of a few UFC fighters who won the Ultimate Fighter and then won a championship. A few of them off the top, obviously Forrest Griffin, Michael Bisping, Rashad Evans, Kamaru Usman. There's a few more that I'm blanking on, but those are the big ones that come to mind. Robert Whittaker was right there with them. On the show, first off, check out this clip from the show. Look at a young Robert Whittaker, huh? How about that? Look at that look in his eyes, huh? And enjoy this nice little clip of Robert eating some Cocoa Pebbles, just being a grand old dude. But on the show, he got two very quick knockouts. One with a lunging right hand, the other one, same deal, lunging right hand. And that set him up to go to the finale. He spent about 1 minute and 30 seconds in the cage, I believe, maybe 2 minutes in the cage on the show. And then the finale went to decision with the other finalist and won the whole dang shebang. Now, Whittaker, as we know, he has a few signature moves, we'll call them. The most predominant being his 1-2 high kick, something that he's landed through and through his whole career. He uses the jab, set up the right hand. The right hand's really a throwaway, and then he throws up that right head kick. And more often than not, he catches his opponents with it. It only took till later in his career for guys to really find that, because Whittaker is very good at timing it. Now, Whittaker comes from a karate background, so he uses a kind of bouncing in and out movement that we're used to seeing from guys the likes of Wonder Boy, Lyoto Machida, to name a few. Whittaker has that same style of bouncy movement, but he lunges in, he blitzes, if you will. A lot of times he'll blitz into his techniques. His left hook is nasty, his 1-2 high kick, as we mentioned. His lunging right hand, which won him the Ultimate Fighter, as we just pointed out. And another big punch for him is his uppercut. The uppercut he used a few times in his run-up to the title. We'll cover those bases. And in his most recent knockout victory over Ikram Aliskerov, he used that to find the finish. Before any of that, though, Robert Whittaker was also a great wrestler. He wrestled for the Australian national team and did very well. The guy has phenomenal takedown defense, as we've seen throughout his career. We're going to look at some of those highlights in a moment. But these are the tools that really make Robert Whittaker so dangerous. He has a money jab. He has a great lunging straight. His blitzes that he catches people off timing with, the bouncing footwork, the 1-2 head kick, the uppercut, and the wrestling are all components of Robert Whittaker's game and what makes him such a great fighter and a future champion, or a champion, I should say. So, after winning the Ultimate Fighter, he beat the other guy in the finale. I believe his name is Brad Scott. He beat him by decision. They put him in there against Colton Smith, another Ultimate Fighter winner, who won around the same time. You know, at the time, the discourse was like, yeah, Tough Smash is okay, but like neither of these guys can compete with the American Tough, and that's not what happened. Robert Whittaker ran through Colton Smith, knocked him out in the third round. Colton Smith's super tough, took a lot of damage in that fight, but ultimately was finished in that third with this sequence of beautiful left hooks as he was lunging in. Whittaker has made a great career off of capitalizing when guys come in too recklessly. And, later that would be his own downfall against Adesanya, but we'll talk about that when it happens. After this victory over Colton Smith, after this knockout victory, Whittaker dropped a split decision to Court McGee, a veteran who was able to use his clinch wrestling to nullify Whittaker's explosiveness. And then he got finished by Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. It was a very high-octane fight between two karate practitioners, and both of them were moving really fast. Whittaker, unfortunately, was on the wrong side of a few straight rights from Wonderboy, and Wonderboy was able to find that finish. After that, Whittaker would win one more fight at welterweight by decision, before prompting a move up to middleweight. The move up to middleweight for Robert Whittaker was largely inspired by his difficulty with the weight cut and his body kind of coming into his own. Around this time he was only about 25, 26, and so he was still filling out his frame, so to speak. When he moved up to middleweight, he found a lot more success, as we're about to go on. He went on this legendary run through the middleweight division, a very stacked division at the time. He beat all the boogeymen of the division at the time, the scariest guys that the division had to offer, on his way to the title. So it was a great move for Whittaker, but it all starts with that first fight at middleweight, and that was one against Clint Hester. Now, Hester was a big, strong wrestler, also from The Ultimate Fighter. And although the physicality did trouble Whittaker at some exchanges, he was able to still carry that power he had at welterweight and drop Hester at the end of the first round. And then later in the second, it looked like that knockdown really took everything out of Clint, and Whittaker essentially broke him in there and finished him off with some big punches and a knee to the head that wilted Clint Hester and let Whittaker find the ground and pound finish. It was an awesome finish for him and a great way to step up to middleweight. After that, he took on another grizzled veteran in Brad Tavares, a guy who's still competing in the middleweight division, albeit, a little bit on the ripe end now, but at the time he was coming off of, his first loss in a while against Tim Boach. And Robert Whittaker made short work of Brad Tavares. He threw the front kick up the middle. It just missed, and when he landed back, he threw this leaping left hook, or I should say like a surging left hook, over the top of the guard of Tavares and dropped him bad. He followed Tavares to the ground. Tavares got back up. They had a little bit of a firefight exchange, and again, boom, big left hook from Robert Whittaker, and he found the finish in about 44 seconds. It was his quickest finish to date in the UFC, besides the Ultimate Fighter, and his quickest knockout at middleweight for a long time. Whittaker was, hot on the tails after that knockout. Definitely on everybody's radar who was in the know at the time. And they matched him up with a couple of very solid matchups, guys that were super tough that would test him in different ways, in both Rafael Natal and Uriah Hall. Natal was a big jiu-jitsu practitioner, big as in physically big. He's also very very credentialed, but Robert Whittaker was able to use his defensive wrestling to keep Natal off of him and land the cleaner strikes en route to a decision victory, a very convincing one. And then he fought Uriah Hall, who we know for his explosive knockout ability, and Whittaker was able to nullify that with a series of leg kicks, jabs, and feints to kind of overload Uriah Hall and, again, win a very convincing decision victory. Now, this set up one of my favorite fights in Robert Whittaker's storied career, and that is the fight against Derek Brunson. Derek Brunson at the time was on a 4-fight knockout streak, tied for the longest, 4-fight first-round knockout streak. Tied for the longest first-round knockout streak in modern UFC history to that point, and he was looking to make it the longest by knocking out Whittaker in the first round. Brunson, at the time, was lunging forward a lot at the hips and throwing with everything he had into his punches, and it was working, man. He had 4 first-round knockouts in a row. We can laugh about it now because the technique looks atrocious, but at the time, he was catching guys off guard with this, and for my money, he was one of the scarier fighters at middleweight at this point. Yeah, of course, you can look at it now and be like, oh, he was bad technique, sloppy, whatever, but at the time, he was knocking out dudes like Uriah Hall and, other great fighters, putting them out, so I don't blame him for trusting in his hands that much. Unfortunately, he ran into Robert Whittaker's left hook, which was a monster. We see a lot of shots here of Derek Brunson leaning forward at the hips, like I said, trying to take Whittaker's head off, throwing uppercuts at his guard and everything like that. Whittaker would go on to land that left hook when Brunson was completely out of position, and this changed the whole expression of the fight. After that, Brunson was on the defense for most of the time and trying to get to his wrestling, and Whittaker was stalking him with vicious intent, and eventually landed that beautiful 1-2 head kick, as we see here, that put Brunson on skates and finished him with some punches after that. It was an awesome victory. It was, essentially a comeback victory, because he did buzz Whittaker in the beginning of that round, and it was in New Zealand, if I'm not mistaken. It was either New Zealand or Australia, and the crowd was going apeshit. Side note, a really funny thing with this fight was that they had a graphic on the bottom right corner of Whittaker and Brunson, and the contrast was crazy. I don't know what happened with the editing or something, but it made Whittaker look like the whitest man possible and Derek Brunson the blackest man possible. So it was hilarious. At the time I saw it, the whole broadcast, it was going that same graphic. So I thought I would point that out because I thought it was funny as hell. Another thing that really stands out when I'm rewatching these fights is how good the UFC commentary teams used to be, man. You had guys like Brian Stan up there, Jimmy Smith, Ken Flo and John Anik, phenomenal combination. John Gooden and Dan Hardy, phenomenal combination. Not that the new, boots aren't that great, but man, that was a golden age that I don't think we really took enough credit for, or gave enough credit for, rather. So, after this knockout over the surging Brunson in the first round, Whittaker found himself in the top 5 of a stacked middleweight division, and a middleweight division that kind of had a logjam at the top end of it. George St. Pierre was scheduled to fight Michael Bisping, who had the title. Bisping had only defended once, and it was against Dan Henderson, and really a grudge match that Henderson didn't deserve the title shot. But, he got it, and Bisping defended it, and he took some damage in that fight, so he had to heal up. In the meantime, they made Jacare Souza versus Yoel Romero. Yoel Romero and Jacare Souza were both on 5 or 6 fight win streaks at the time in middleweight and were looking very scary. Jacare Souza, if you aren't familiar, is a extremely credentialed BJJ player, one of the maybe top 3 or 4 highest credentialed BJJ players in UFC history, and at the time top 3 for sure. We saw a couple of big jiu-jitsu names come into the UFC after this point, but at the time it was him, Damian Maia, and Fabricio Verdum that were the most credentialed, and Jacare was terrifying on the ground. He frequently submit people in under 2 minutes, if not beat them down and then submit them later. So on top of that great jiu-jitsu game, he had some serious power in his hands, some decent boxing, very much of a Nogueira archetype, I would say. And Yoel Romero, on the other hand, was a silver Olympic medalist in freestyle wrestling for Cuba. Super credentialed wrestler, very explosive in the octagon. He was known for knocking guys out in the 3rd round. It was at a few points in his career leading up to this point where he would be, kind of competitive with the guy and then completely blow him out of the water in the 3rd round. It felt like Romero would be holding back some explosiveness so that he doesn't gas himself out and then just let that shit loose in the 3rd. I remember him finishing Lyoto Machida. I remember him finishing Derek Brunson, who we just talked about. I remember him finishing Chris Weidman, a few guys. 3rd round Romero was a monster. So, in the meantime, while they sorted out the Henderson-Bisping GSP nonsense, Jacare and Yoel fought each other to determine a number 1 contender. It was a very close fight, a fight that could have been, won or lost on a hair, and they gave the fight to Yoel Romero. Now, I remember thinking at the time that Jacare had done enough to win, but it is what it is. So, Jacare, coming off of that razor-thin loss, drew Robert Whittaker, a surging contender at middleweight, Robert Whittaker. And for a lot of people, this was going to be the end of Whittaker's middleweight run. We saw Jacare just lose a very close decision to a monster in Yoel Romero, a guy who was undefeated in the UFC at that point. It kind of felt like a foregone conclusion that Jacare deserved his title shot already. So I guess he'll fight this guy, Robert Whittaker, in the meantime, and get another check mark off the box. check the box off the mark. Whatever, dude. You know what I'm trying to say. He wanted to check another box off. Anyway, that didn't happen. Robert Whittaker put a screeching halt to Jacare's title aspirations. And honestly, one of the best performances of his career here in this fight against Jacare. In the first round, Jacare got to the takedown relatively quickly, and Whittaker defended it very well. He found himself with his back against the cage, and Jacare used his famous, they call it the gator roll, where he grabs a single leg and rolls sideways like an alligator to find a better position off of it, to find a double leg or to find the takedown itself. Whittaker defended it extremely well, found himself with his back against the cage, and Jacare climbed his back. Whittaker stayed calm, used a 2-on-1 baseball grip, and was able to break free and get back to the center of the cage. The rest of the round was sort of a staring contest, Whittaker landing some lunging straights and jabs to the teeps to the body. But in the second round, Whittaker would find extreme success. Whittaker, in that second round, dropped Jacare with a big right hand, a lunging right hand, similar to the ones that he landed on the Ultimate Fighter house. And from then on, it was kind of just a cascading nightmare for Jacare Souza. Whittaker stayed on the pressure. He stayed in Jacare's face. He landed a beautiful 1-2 head kick, one of his patented, signature moves. And the head kick kind of landed on the back end, or I should say on the downside, so it didn't land super clean. Later in the round, he did land it super clean and dropped Jacare to his knees, or at least stunned him, and finished the guy with some punches. Jacare goes to his guard. Whittaker jumps in his guard and lands some brutal elbows, forcing Jacare to turn back, giving up his back, and the referee had seen enough at that point and gave Whittaker the second round TKO. It was an awesome fight, and honestly a flawless performance. Considering who Jacare was at that time, considering his credentials, considering what he'd done in the UFC at that point, what he'd done in Strikeforce, this was a signature win for Robert Whittaker, and exactly what he needed to stamp his way to a title shot. That was everything we needed to see. We just saw Jacare and Romero have this razor-thin fight, I should say. It wasn't really a war, it was much a closer fight, and Robert Whittaker is here smoking Jacare and blowing the doors off of him. So there was a clear number one contender in everybody's eyes, and that was Robert Whittaker. So, having stamped his ticket to the title shot, Robert Whittaker was scheduled to face Michael Bisping for the vacant belt, for the undisputed belt. At this point, though, unfortunately, Michael Bisping would get an injury. And by that I mean he wanted to fight GSP for the money. Of course, why wouldn't he? GSP talked about coming back. He wanted to fight at middleweight to come back. They made that fight. In the meantime, Robert Whittaker would have a Herculean task in front of him in Yoel Romero, who was undefeated in the UFC, as I just mentioned. The only time he had even a close fight was against Jacare, who was an absolute monster. And the stage was set for Robert Whittaker to fight for the interim title against Yoel Romero at UFC 213. Now, this is another one of my favorite fights from Robert Whittaker. A great performance from Whittaker, a classic performance. And in my opinion, this might be one of the, if not the easiest fight to score as far as the title fight goes in UFC history. The first round, Romero was able to throw out enough volume to kind of keep Robert Whittaker on the defensive this whole round. He didn't land any necessarily super damaging shots, but he didn't allow Whittaker to get into the fight. He also stomped on Whittaker's knee almost immediately in the fight and completely tore apart that, I believe it was the left knee of Whittaker. This was an injury that Whittaker was nursing going into this fight, and I don't know if you all had a spy in the camp or it was just something he saw in the warm-up or if it was just something that he wanted to do anyway, but he was targeting that knee and he took it out really quickly. Whittaker goes back to the corner and he says, "My leg is fucked." And the corner says, which part of your leg? He says, "You know which part." So that tells me that there was an injury going into this fight. And unfortunately, Whittaker had to fight the next 4 rounds on one knee, and he did a great job of it. So second round comes out, Romero, much like the first round, just does not let Whittaker get into the fight, but this time he employs his wrestling a lot more. Whittaker, as we mentioned, is a phenomenal defensive wrestler, so Romero's not able to get a ton of positions, but he is able to hold Whittaker against the cage for extended periods of time in this round and win that round on every judge's scorecards, pretty much by stopping Whittaker from being able to do anything. And now this is where things start to change. Third round, Romero looks exhausted, and Whittaker is landing these teeps to the body the whole fight. He's landing these teeps to the body, these lunging push kicks to the body. He's landing the jab, he's landing the straight, the left hook is there too, and he's really just, picking apart the undefeated, Cuban standout in Yoel Romero. He starts to mount more and more office as the round goes on. At the end of the round, Romero looks exhausted, and the camera pans over to Michael Bisping, the current undisputed champion, and he rips up a Cuban flag, essentially disrespecting Yoel Romero and saying that he's done. Romero and Bisping had a lot of beef at this point. This is where the "see you soon, bye" interview came out, was with Romero and Bisping having that beef. So Bisping probably felt pretty vindicated that Whittaker was essentially handling his dirty work for him. So after that third round, the momentum completely swung into the way of Robert Whittaker, and it just stayed that way in the fourth round. Whittaker was able to, still land a bunch of teeps to the body of Yoel Romero, was able to keep Romero on the back foot for most of the round, landing solid strikes and defending the takedowns with ease now. The takedowns are coming a lot slower and a lot less measured now, and Whittaker saw them coming from a mile away and was able to defend them very properly. In that fifth round, Romero even got reversed on one of his takedowns, and Whittaker ended up keeping the top position for the last 2 minutes or so and just raining down elbows on Romero and putting a stamp on a very, very clear 48-47 win. It's not rare, but we see a lot in the sport. A fighter win 3 rounds to 2, but the 3 rounds that he won were super clear. There's no argument there. A good recent example would be Merab versus Umar, Merab versus O'Malley. There's a couple other examples, but those are the 2 that are on the top of my head right now, where it's a 3-2 victory. Sure, you could be like, hey, that's a close fight, but you watch the fight and you're like, damn, that guy definitely won. And that was the case here. Robert Whittaker got it done and was able to put back the boogeyman of the division in Yoel Romero. Now, this puts Robert Whittaker on a 3-fight win streak, really it's like a 6-fight win streak, but a 3-fight win streak against 3 of the scariest guys at middleweight at the time. A surging Derek Brunson, who was on, tied for the record of the most first-round knockouts in a row. You had a bona fide contender in Jacare Souza, who was one judge's scorecard away from being in the title fight himself. And then a victory over Yoel Romero, who was an absolute monster and a terror for the division. And Whittaker put them all away, or at least put away the first 2 guys, and beat Yoel Romero convincingly in that third fight. However, Romero did injure Whittaker's knee really badly in that first round, and Whittaker would have to take some time off to heal from that injury. In the meantime, Bisping would lose the title to GSP, and GSP would vacate it, leaving Robert Whittaker to be the undisputed champion. While that was going on, Whittaker was supposed to fight Luke Rockhold to defend his belt for the first time in Perth, in Australia, on home territory. Unfortunately, Whittaker had to pull out with some health issues before that fight, a litany of health issues. So many things were going on in his life at that point, but it forced him to pull out. And in stepped Yoel Romero. Yoel Romero fought Luke Rockhold for the interim belt because they needed to put a belt while Whittaker was injured. And although he missed weight, he knocked out Luke Rockhold in the third round familiarly and knocked him out cold. And it was like, holy shit, this guy's still a monster, So, that being said, although he wasn't the interim champion because he missed weight, he was the clear number 1 contender again. And Robert Whittaker had to do the impossible a second time and fight Yoel Romero in a 5-round fight and try to get a victory against this monster, this behemoth. That second fight, is one of the best fights of UFC history, in my opinion. It's a phenomenal fight. It's a really fun fight to rewatch. At the time, it was terrifying. I mean, as a Whittaker fan, it was terrifying. Yoel Romero, in this fight, he employed a very, let's call it a cautious guard, where he just kind of stood with his hands up, like in this block pattern, and it really confused a lot of the opponents. It confused Rockhold, it confused later Adesanya, but in this fight, Whittaker was able to kind of just mount offense while Romero did his thing. He landed a crazy amount of strikes in the first 2 rounds, and then third round Romero came out. Third round Romero tried to knock off Whittaker's head, and he damn near did it in about 20 seconds. He dropped Whittaker with a huge right hand, and had Robert Whittaker on skates, had the champion on skates. Romero would try to follow it up and finish him with ground and pound, with takedowns. Whittaker would go for the takedown himself and get stuffed, of course, because it's an Olympic wrestler you're fighting against. And, you know, eventually would be able to kind of stall enough position to kind of get his bearings back. Once he got his bearings back, Whittaker landed this beautiful elbow when his back was against the fence, and you know that was one of the few strikes in this round that stopped it from being a 10-8, because otherwise it was just the Yoel Romero show, you know, getting close to the finish over and over. But Whittaker fought back. He landed a really beautiful elbow in that third round that backed up Yoel Romero, and then later in the round he lands a crispy 1-2 head kick, one of his cleanest in his career. But Yoel Romero is the Terminator, and he just walks through that shit. It was absolutely insane. Absolutely, completely clean head kick, shin across the chin, the whole 9, and Romero eats it like a Tic Tac. Insanity. Fourth round comes out. Robert Whittaker wins this round on all the judges' scorecards. He just simply outlands Romero, who really blew his load trying to take out the champion in that third round. However, the fifth round was another terrifying one if you're a Whittaker fan. Romero would rock Whittaker all over the cage, over and over, back and forth. Very similar to the third round, except in this round, Whittaker did not have the answers back in the head kick and the elbows against the fence that he did in the third. Romero would end up with a lot of top position as well in this fifth round, and you know, you wouldn't be crazy to think that fifth round was a 10-8. In my opinion, it was. In my opinion, this fight was a draw. I had Robert Whittaker winning the first, second, and fourth round, you know, clear-cut 10-9s. Third round, 10-9 for Yoel, and then the fifth round, a 10-8 for Yoel. So I personally scored it a draw. That would mean that champion Whittaker would retain his belt regardless. But the judges saw it different, thank God. They gave it to Whittaker, a split decision, I believe, but he got the victory. I think the judges were kind of over Yoel Romero's bullshit. He had missed weight in this fight as well, and missed weight in the last one that was also for a belt. So he was ineligible for the belt 2 times in a row. If he had won, they would have had to do a rematch. If they did a draw, if it was a draw, then it would have had to been a rematch as well. And either way, you're kind of rewarding Yoel Romero for having a good performance after missing weight. So even though I don't necessarily agree that it was a 3-2 decision victory for Whittaker, I was not upset with the outcome because I didn't want to see this fight again. You know, I wanted the division to move on, so to speak. Whittaker, you know, fought his heart out against Romero twice now. And, I mean, come on, you want him to fight this guy a third time? You know what I mean? Like, the poor bastard. So, after the second Yoel fight, in comes rising contender Israel Adesanya. Now, we all remember how this fight went. As I mentioned before, Whittaker's kind of made a career off of blitzing his opponents, lunging in, going forward whenever they are thinking that the fight is stagnated, kind of lulling them into a false sense of security and then blitzing forward. Robert Whittaker, unfortunately, could not use this tactic against Israel Adesanya. He would blitz forward and landed some good stuff in the first round, or for the first few minutes of the first round, but it was really just Adesanya making his reads. Adesanya landed a huge hook at the end of the first that dropped the champion, and then in the second round it was a nearly identical sequence where Izzy leaned back and landed this 2-3 on the back, or I'm sorry, a 3-4, 2 hooks. Completely leaned back and caught Whittaker 100% off his balance and hurt the champion really badly and finished him. This would be the second time that Whittaker was finished by strikes in the UFC, both of them by long, rangy counter-strikers in Stephen Thompson and Israel Adesanya. So, although he had made this career off of beating great grapplers and guys like Brunson, Romero, Jacare, it seemed that this archetype, the long, rangy counterpuncher, was something that gave Whittaker problems. In the meantime, Israel would go on to defend the belt a couple times against guys like Jared Cannonier, Yoel Romero, in a very boring fight. A couple other victories he had in there, Marvin Vettori, I believe. And Robert Whittaker would kind of get relegated to a, gatekeeper, so to speak, for the title. He would beat, convincingly, Jared Cannonier, Darren Till, and Kelvin Gastelum. All convincing decisions, very reminiscent of that space between the Brunson and Tavares fight, where Whittaker's just kind of showing his full breadth of MMA knowledge, And these 3 fights in particular, Whittaker used a lot more of his wrestling and offense and was able to rack up minutes and minutes of top control against guys in Gastelum and Till, who are not known for their defensive grappling, and then against Jared Cannonier. He did very well in that fight. He got rocked at one point, but other than that, fought a very good fight. Next, these 3 fights in a row, you kind of, at a certain point, it's like, who else can you fight except for the champion? So they make the rematch. Israel Adesanya versus Robert Whittaker 2. Now, this is a highly contentious decision. At the time, I felt like Whittaker won. It was kind of there was 2 stories in the fight. Both guys kind of were answering the same questions, posting the same questions, answering the same way throughout the whole 5 rounds. In the first round, Izzy did drop Whittaker, similar to how he did in the first fight where he was lunging in and got caught. So this kind of made Whittaker take a step back and be a little bit more cautious on his entries. And that turned out to be a great thing for him. So Whittaker would be landing the jab and going to the double leg. Adesanya almost exclusively was landing leg kicks this whole fight. So this was a very contentious decision. Majority of fan scoring had Whittaker winning this fight, winning rounds 2, 4, and 5. The judges would see it for Adesanya rounds 1, 2, and 3, with Whittaker winning the 4th and 5th on a couple of scorecards. But ultimately, this was a really close fight that just comes down to how you score the MMA fight. Do you give prescience to the guy who's moving forward the whole time? Do you give prescience to the guy who has the better body language? Do you give prescience to the guy who's landing more volume, even though the volume may not be as damaging? This is kind of, if the Whittaker-Romero fight, the first one, was the easiest to score in UFC history, this is one of the harder fights to score in UFC history, and so is that second Romero fight, actually. Those fights were both really hard to score. I personally felt like Whittaker did enough to win, but the judges gave it to Adesanya, and I'll be honest, at the time, it felt like Adesanya could do no wrong in the judges' eyes. I remember him winning several rounds against Cannonier, against Whittaker, that I thought that he lost, but the judges gave it to him, maybe just on body language or anything like that, but it is what it is. That being said, moving forward, after he lost to Izzy the second time, much less convincingly, but he did lose, he would beat Marvin Vettori in a very convincing fashion. Marvin Vettori, perennial gatekeeper. And then Whittaker would lose to Dricus du Plessis by finish. This was a heartbreaker. Du Plessis, everybody thought he was going to get smoked by Whittaker. Plus, he was on this run at the time where he was just super sloppy and super athletic, super physical. But, we thought that if he fought somebody who was clean and technical like Whittaker, this would be the ceiling for him. Unfortunately, that was not the case. Du Plessis would knock out Whittaker in the second round and then go on to beat the champion in Sean Strickland, I believe it was. Yeah, in Strickland at the time. Now Du Plessis is the reigning champion. But, yeah, at the time it was a shocking upset and a really heartbreaking loss for Robert Whittaker. Whittaker would come back from that loss, though, and he would beat Paulo Costa convincingly by decision, with only one scare in that first round with the wheel kick from Paulo. And then he would put on, in my opinion, one of his most signature wins against Ikram Aliskerov. Whittaker was scheduled to face Khamzat Chimaev. Chimaev unfortunately had to pull out the week before, and in comes Ikram Aliskerov. It's worth noting here that Aliskerov did have the main event slot the week before, so he cut weight twice in a row. He was ready to go for that main event. They pulled him out to put him in this one. So that may have impacted his performance, but regardless, we saw a vintage Robert Whittaker performance here. His first UFC finish in years. He was kind of building up this repertoire, or this reputation, I should say, building up this reputation as a decision fighter, with those decisions over Vettori, Gastelum, Till, Cannonier. But, I mean, those are some of the toughest guys in UFC history. I mean, except for, I guess, Darren Till, but the other guys are known for their chins. So no shame in beating them by decision. Paulo Costa as well. And here he was able to sort of turn back the clock and have this vintage performance. We saw it all, baby. We saw the lunging right hand. That's what hurt him. We saw a beautiful 1-2 head kick. Although it didn't land perfectly, it did break the posture of Ikram Aliskerov and allowed him to set up this money-making uppercut. Boom, right there. Beautiful uppercut that snaps the head back of Ikram Aliskerov and gets Robert Whittaker the first round finish. And a very vindicating finish, to be honest. It was a refreshing finish to see, and a breath of fresh air in the Robert Whittaker career at this point, at this stage of his career, I should say. So Whittaker was able to kind of turn back the clock, turn back a surging contender, a guy who a lot of people thought maybe a champion one day, or at least on his way there, a guy who had only lost to Khamzat Chimaev before that, and that left nowhere to go except for a rebooking with Khamzat Chimaev. So Whittaker was scheduled to face Chimaev, and unfortunately would come up short there, with Chimaev getting the back quickly and squeezing the face of Whittaker and essentially, punching in his bottom teeth there. Apparently it was an old injury that Whittaker had years and years ago, sort of his Achilles heel, if you will. Nobody knew about it. Khamzat Chimaev got there and got the quick tap from Whittaker as a result. Now, as it stands, Robert Whittaker is scheduled to face Rene de Ridder, RDR, who's coming off of a big knockout over Bo Nickel. I personally believe Robert Whittaker is going to wash him. He's going to wipe the floor with him, but I'm biased, as you can tell. I love Robert Whittaker, and I had a lot of fun going back through his career and, outlining the steps of the way that gave him, this storied career, this legendary run. And I appreciate y'all for watching. I appreciate y'all for staying tuned. Thank you so much, everybody. Appreciate y'all. I hope you enjoyed this one. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed making it. And I love y'all. And you guys have a beautiful rest of your day. Thank you so much. Take it easy. Peace out. Now, Robert Whittaker's career is not done. His career is not done. He still has some gas in the tank. It doesn't matter what happens, though. He's already had this legendary career, if you ask me, and anything that he does moving forward will only add to that. So I don't feel bad putting out the retrospective before he's done, before he's tied him up. But I appreciate y'all watching, and much love, y'all. Thank you so much. Peace out. Check out my other historical pieces. Check out my week-to-week content breaking down the cards. Even if you don't want to watch the card, I am going to break it down. I don't care. I'm crazy. I love y'all. Peace out. And I know I already said it 3 times, but I love y'all. Peace out. Much out.